I think I'm working really hard to make sure it feels really narrative, like a story, a fairy tale, but it's true. It's something that really happened. An octopus truly escaped out of its tank and went down a drain pipe back to the ocean. And so it's like kind of finding these incredible, we're working on one right now about a dog that joined a coyote pack for 2 years and then was rescued. And it's real. These are real. We are nonfiction. We are fact-checked, but we're trying to create these kind of fairy tales that are true and teach us something a little bit about nature that maybe it works differently than you might expect.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities. Pasta sauce.
Me, they, me, they, me, they.
Me. What are we talking? Hi, Mitch.
Hi, Ethan. Are we recording?
We are recording.
Is this thing on?
Hello, ladies and germs.
Sorry, I was just doing Wordle.
Oh, what was today's Wordle? This will air after, so it's fine. Help me cheat on Wordle.
You know, the problem is I don't really remember what today's Wordle was.
Have you ever gotten Wordle in one?
I've gotten Wordle in one. I've gotten Wordle in one once.
Just once?
Yeah.
What was it? Do you remember?
Nope.
Nah, I don't remember either. It was a momentous occasion. Then I was like, I'm going to purge that.
You know, you've got the people who do Wordle thinking that maybe this will be the time I get it in one, and then the people who do Wordle with a strategy towards getting it in 2 or 3. And I'm still the guy who thinks, well, maybe this time it'll be pleat.
I was getting pretty good for a while. I had a strong opening word. I don't remember what it was now because I've been out of the habit for a couple of years, honestly. But I was averaging I was getting it at around 4 every single time for a while.
You know, there's a website you can actually plug in your scores and it'll give you your Wordle average.
Really?
I believe my Wordle average is 3.992.
That's not bad.
No,
that's pretty good.
I don't complain.
Put that on your resume.
I was a little disheartened the other day when the word was booty.
Oh, I
thought it discriminated against those of us who have no butt. I never would have thought of it.
Just our pants goes just straight up. There's no curve. It's like you made a frog wear pants and stand up.
Yes. So as we think about today's episode of Northwards, I'm going to share a little anecdote that tells you just what a geek I am.
Okay.
Or maybe just how long I have been committed to the field of journalism.
Okay.
When I was growing up, my father worked for a scientific association, which, can I say it on the air?
I don't know.
Just kidding. The American Association for the Advancement of Science. They had this annual meeting every year because that's the way annual meetings work.
Right.
And every once in a while, he would take me along because it was a trip someplace.
Wait, what was his role?
He was the head of science policy for this association. So anyway, he once took me to the event in question, I believe, was the time I went to Los Angeles with him. And there was at one of these meetings, and like I said, I think it was Los Angeles, but I could be wrong. There was a seminar about science journalism. Okay. And it was mainly geared towards people who were either entering the field or they were working as public affairs officers for, like hospitals or research labs or whatever, trying to explain to them, like, this is how you pitch a story to a journalist, and this is how a journalist would take, something that's complicated science and explain it in a way that people might understand. And so they did this exercise.
To us non-geeks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I was not a science geek, mind you. I mean, I might have been if I had studied harder, but
you were more interested in baseball and cameras.
I was more interested in baseball and cameras and
which are geeky in their own way, I guess.
But what they did, we were all sitting at tables, of like 7 or 8 people, and they passed out a scientific article about, in this case, it was circadian rhythms. So the idea was, here's an article about stuff that was being learned about circadian rhythms at the time.
Yeah.
And how would you construct a news story for a general audience about this article?
Okay.
And they gave us like 15 minutes to write, the lead and maybe the first paragraph. And then one person at each table was supposed to read theirs. And, I was sitting at a table with a lot of people who were much older than me. And being the geek that I am, I volunteered to read mine. And mine was like 5 paragraphs long.
You really went for it.
Well, I really went for it. And I'd been, pretending to be a journalist already for a long time.
How old were you at this point?
I was probably 15 or 16. Okay. Yeah. And it never quite dawned on me, like, what a snot-nosed kid I must have come off as. But they actually cut me off after 2 paragraphs.
They're like, that's enough. We only wanted one.
Yeah, exactly. But like the thing that episode, I don't know that episode taught me this, but the thing that like the light bulb went off was the idea that science journalism is kind of like the most pure form of journalism. It's like taking something that might be complicated, but in some way it applies to everybody, and you're trying to explain it to everybody. And it really is a science, or maybe it's an art, or maybe it's a little of both.
But do you think that there's less of an inclination to editorialize through fact-based science stuff?
Well, you would think, right? I hesitate to say anything in the current climate surrounding science or surrounding journalism or surrounding the world, but yeah, I mean, you can't completely distance yourself from context when you're talking about science, but like a really good scientific piece will engage the audience and make them understand why this, possibly esoteric topic actually
impacts your daily life.
Yeah. Or might someday impact your daily life. I mean, hard to say why discovering, a planet orbiting a star that's outside our own galaxy will immediately impact us. But being able to put it in the context of what we know about the universe, or how what we know about the universe impacts life here on Earth, I mean, there's really a skill in doing that. And so the reason I bring this up, you're probably wondering why I'm bringing this up today, Ethan.
I'm not checking my watch or anything.
Ethan Shanty is our producer here on Northwards, and he joins us at the beginning of these conversations. But in this case, I've waited until the middle of the conversation to introduce him.
Well, all I'm thinking is just I have like 3 or 4 more articles to read about a comet that has a 1.8% chance of striking the Earth in 100 years. So if you could get to it, I'd appreciate that.
All right. So on this episode of Northwards, we talk with Lulu Miller, who is a well-known and respected science journalist.
And also the co-host of Radiolab and a best-selling author.
And actually, interestingly, author of a relatively new picture book for kids that has pretty much nothing to do with science, but we talk a little bit about it in our conversation. She was in the North Country recently to read and talk as part of the St. Lawrence University Writers Series, and it was really great. She stopped by the station, spent a lot of time with us, and we had a really good conversation that we are going to hear now. Lulu Miller, thanks for being with us.
I am so happy to be here in the studio.
Well, and so I will say, Lulu Miller, we are terrifically happy to have you here in our studio. And hopefully you are feeling okay about a conversation that might go all over the map.
I am so ready. Let's go. I'm excited to go on whatever journey you take us.
Well, and I'll start by saying I'm maybe a little intimidated talking with somebody who is a major part of a program that kind of pushes the boundaries of audio. And here we are in a studio with 2 microphones having what would normally be thought of as kind of a linear conversation.
I promise you it won't be linear because my brain doesn't work that way.
Sound effects are not going to start coming in midway through.
You never know. Sometimes I do them, much to my wife's sadness. They do sometimes they happen. We'll see.
I think it must be a radio thing because I do them all the time, much to my wife's sadness. You can almost hear her eyes rolling.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
But maybe that's a good place to start. Can we talk about the anatomy of a Radiolab episode or a Terrestrials episode?
Yeah.
I imagine the development process looks a little different than, say, how a day's All Things Considered comes together.
Yes, probably. Yeah. So, I mean, both of the shows are, starting with Radiolab, if you've never heard it, it's sort of like a documentary film for the ear, where you are following what seems to be a story about someone's life, and then suddenly it crashes into science. But then maybe suddenly it also crashes into a strange diversion that one of the reporters or the hosts or someone in the story has. And then that itself gets sound designed and sometimes turns into a mini story. And then you go back to the main story. And it's kind of this, I mean, I think, the Jad Abumrad and Robert Krulwich, who started it, they put it together right when digital editing became a thing, like the technology was available. And Jad's background was as a composer. He was really into digital music. And so he had this fluency with Pro Tools. And he would take conversation and almost edit it like music. And, now this is something all kinds of people can do. There's 2 million podcasts. People are playing with it in new ways. They're evolving it. But at the time, it was new. But I think what's really special about it is it's this kind of fusion of using conversation itself as a narrative background, like a real conversation. You might have points. It's similar to like if you show up at a party and you have a story you want to tell, and you tell it. But then the person you're telling it to knocks it around a little and asks questions. And I think what was kind of innovative at the time was preserving that process and then editing that down and then maybe going out to interview a scientist and adding music. And so it's kind of this fusion. It's this, I would say, sort of like a whiplash between raw and then highly controlled, raw and highly controlled. And we're always kind of tinkering with those moments. When do we want to be curated to the level of, we've spent days editing this 1 minute and there's original music, and then when do we want to let the next 2 minutes be totally raw? And it's kind of playing with those two things.
Well, and it's so funny because I think about my early days in radio, and I remember there's a guy that I think they called him the host whisperer. He came from CBC.
Yeah, he worked with Jad.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. And his name is totally left my brain.
Is it David Kandow?
It is David Kandow.
Yes, and I worked with him. Before he passed, I got to do a week-long fellowship with him in Michigan, and he's wonderful.
He is wonderful, and I worked with him in Michigan also at the Great Lakes Radio Consortium once, and then we brought him out to Arizona when I was out there. But the thing that I remember was when he was editing, it was like with a meat cleaver. Like if there was a piece of a sentence that didn't somehow go down this really narrative through line.
It was out.
It was out.
Yeah.
And this completely, what you're describing, completely explodes that idea in a way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't in a way also.
Yeah, totally. And I think, one thing I'm always thinking about is, so I love reading, I love writing, but I think sometimes when the written word is read out loud, it becomes very lulling. And I remember kind of going to readings and you're it's so nice to hear someone, but within about a minute or two, your mind is wandering and it's peaceful, but you're forgetting to listen. And there's something about conversation itself, the places people halt or stutter or giggle, that it pulls the brain in more. And so, and then of course the human voice is just full of emotional grenades. There's so much information and so it's kind of playing with conversation as almost one of the instruments alongside controlled writing, alongside music, alongside, so it's just this, I think, in terms of the anatomy of the show, currently we're trying, our sort of mission statement is to try to always push at the edge of what we think we know and just like talk to someone or have a story or a question, lead us right to that edge and maybe push it out a little. And then for the sister show, the kids spinoff, Terrestrials, it's very much kind of the similar editing style, but it's always about nature, something on Earth, an animal or a plant. And because it's for younger audiences, I think I'm working really hard to make sure it feels really narrative, like a story, a fairy tale, but it's true. It's something that really happened. An octopus truly escaped out of its tank and went down a drain pipe back to the ocean. And so it's like kind of finding these incredible, we're working on one right now about a dog that joined a coyote pack for 2 years and then was rescued. And it's real. These are real. We are nonfiction. We are fact checked, but we're trying to create these kind of fairy tales that are true and teach us something a little bit about nature that maybe it works differently than you might expect.
Well, and it's clearly designed to bring younger listeners in,
Yeah.
but you don't dumb it down at all.
No.
I was really
Yeah.
impressed at how true to the Radiolab feel Terrestrials has.
Yeah, and
is.
I think part of that came from me like wanting to create something I would want to listen to as a parent where I wouldn't, and I don't know if it's working, but I'm trying to have more of a camp counselor or aunt vibe instead of like a teacher dumbing it down. Just I'm not using any swear words, and I'm making the narrative simple enough that and hopefully hooky enough that a kid would want to listen. But other than that, my dream is that it's like a Pixar movie where you're going for the kids, but you're actually kind of liking it, hopefully. So that's that's the hope.
I mean, there's a reason that some of us adults still like to watch Bugs Bunny cartoons,
totally.
right?
Yeah.
Because frankly, they were made at two different levels, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and we're trying to do that at all times.
So I mean, you mentioned the idea of sound design.
Yeah.
And and I was going to ask how early in the picture sound design enters the process.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess maybe before we even get to that, because you mentioned Pro Tools, and I instinctively know what Pro Tools is and how it was different than when we had to edit on 3 or 4 reel-to-reel decks. But most of our listeners probably have no idea what the heck we're talking about. We don't have to get into Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But what are we talking about when we're talking about sound design?
Yeah. So it's sort of this mix of radio, as you may have noticed, is something you hear. You interact with through your ears. And so there's all kinds of things. There's words, there's speech, there's written words, there's music, there's tape that you might get out in the world if you're interviewing someone by a river. You hear the river and you hear them hiking. And then there's this vast area of space in between. It might be musical, it might be the natural world. And so sound design is just thinking about, I think of it as sort of the colors of paint. It helps you paint a picture. It helps paint a picture for the listener to picture, is our studio dark? Is it, or are we out in the world? And you can play very similar to movies that have a score. You can play with it in a similar way where like maybe you introduce some tense music in a scene that seems calm, and it makes you as a listener wonder why, or it makes you, you might not realize, but you're kind of always helping the listener go on a journey by using the natural sound and the music in a way that's hopefully helps that journey be interesting. Maybe it leads them to like something I think about a lot is trying to create little oases of contemplation. So maybe the show is fast, and it's giggly and it's irreverent, and then suddenly there's a deep question and a deeper answer. And now I want to give people silence with a little drone so that it feels like beautiful to swim in those ideas. And I think that's something, I think for a lot of people, our heads can be negative spaces. They can be filled with worries or insecurities. But the power of story, I think, is that it rallies your demons, and they pay attention, and they're in suspense, so they're listening. And then finally, like a few minutes into that story, if you can gift someone with some quiet, I think it's something kind of rare. And I think of it as an oasis, like an oasis, a little swim. And so that's something, again, sound design, it's all that stuff. It's pacing, and then it's where are you fast, and where are you silly, and where are you comic, and where are you deep. And I think both Terrestrials and Radiolab play with whiplash a lot in tone. And that's something I really enjoy as a listener. And so I'm trying to recreate it as a maker. One story someone else pitched, our producer Simon, I believe, was about how in the early days of Morse code, operators could get a little sort of more human and flirty with their silences, and then the silences became regulated. And so like just, I don't know, there's something about our fear of silence, our attempt to govern silence, but what silence can give. I just think it's an interesting topic.
Is there an orchestra conductor that pulls all of these elements together? I would imagine, you think about, again, to use the all things considered metaphor, there's a director or a producer who is making sure all the oars are going in the same direction to put a show together. But with something like Radiolab, I would imagine that the trick is keeping all the oars in the same river. So who is
Yeah.
like, keeping track of the really creative minds who are all doing different things.
It is a highly collaborative shop. Like I think it used to be Jad, and he would work himself to death, and then
hard to believe he would retire.
Yeah, and I think when he left, I mean, Soren is our executive editor, and he certainly holds a lot. But we've kind of turned a lot of what Jad used to do into a collaborative thing. So our pitch process, it used to be way more informal. Now it's super formal. We have voting. We vote on like these 5 categories. Does it lead you somewhere you didn't believe? Does it include a perspective that you might not have heard? We have these categories and we rate them and we look, and it's the whole room, and we talk about them and we look at these bar graphs. Like we have a guy on the team, Harry, he kind of like systemized that, and everyone can weigh in. I mean, we have editors, but everyone can weigh in, and then we finally make a call. So even from the pitch point, but it is a very producer-led shop. By that I mean, we try to empower the person who's in the tape cutting. And we have a meeting where the producer and maybe the reporter will talk about the storyboard and the outline they think it's going to be, and then they cut it, and we people weigh in, and on a given piece you have one editor. And then we have Dylan is our director of sound design, so so the producers will work on stuff, but then it comes to him and he'll kind of make a final call on, does he want to swap in different music? So he holds, I would say, the musical aesthetic of the show, even though all kinds of people are experimenting. But yeah, it is. I mean, I think what it has turned into, I think it used to be Jad's fingerprint, and now it's a lot of people who really admire Jad, each kind of pulling it in their own different ways.
More like a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yeah, totally. And I think that allows for, you get different flavors. You have something about drones and these kind of DIY drones being used on the front lines in Ukraine as a sort of science technology story. In the same, 2 weeks later, you have something about busting up the myth of 5 stages of grief and that sort of science of social science psychology. But they work,
You just you bring up science, and really your job is being a science journalist at some level.
Yeah, totally.
You grew up around science, right?
Mm-hmm. My dad is a biochemist, and pretty much every big question. I realized later I grew up in the Church of Science. Like every big meaning, what's the point? How does this work? Any question from tiny, how does fire work, to big, what are we doing here, was answered through this lens of science. And I didn't realize, and he's like a very wonderful sort of extemporaneous educator, and he likes to talk about these ideas. And so I really kind of was spat out into the world with this sense that you go to scientists for meaning. And so when I heard Radiolab as a kid, just graduated college, not sure what I was doing with my life, I was like, here are these 2 adult men asking deep questions, the kind of questions you're supposed to supposedly be done with once you grow up. But they're still asking them. They're going to scientists. The scientists are sort of indulging them, but then steering it back to what's actually known. And it just felt like that is the place I want to reside. It's this space between what is known, what is studied, and what is kind of contemplated and possible. And I think increasingly as the show has evolved, we've realized that science doesn't have a monopoly on truth. And we go to other experts increasingly, but with a kind of scientific worldview of curiosity and rigor. And but yeah, I mean, I remember hearing the show when I was 21, and it truly was like a beacon. Like, this is the place I want to reside. I want to get in there and do work in there.
Are your dad's answers usually right?
I think I always thought they were. And I think some of my work of growing up is realizing they're not. I think I'm like, oh, it's Dad, so it's probably right. And now I've learned to fact check it or push back. And I think, no one's answers are always right. None of us know. We just, but no, I don't think they are.
I asked that question because my dad's degree, he had a physics degree.
Yeah.
But by the time I was growing up with him, he was a science policy guy.
Okay.
And, his PhD was in political science, and but he always had that science background. But I also know that the thing that he and his friend won the high school science fair for in Chicago in like 1959 or whatever was a total sham that they pulled off.
Really?
It was like, I wish I could remember exactly the story. And my dad passed away, and I think he wrote about it before he died.
Yeah.
But it was this thing that had, lights and levers and purported to do something. And because they were able to explain it so scientifically, they won the science fair. And in fact, that it didn't do anything that they claimed that it did. And that always kind of like,
were they pulling it off? Were they trying to prove a point? Like, were they trying to do a hoax?
Yeah. Oh, they were absolutely trying to do a hoax.
Yeah.
And I think,
yes,
knowing that story, when my dad would answer one of these big picture questions, every once in a while my meter would go off.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the power of dropping a technical word into a sentence, if you can do it with ease, how it makes you sound more legit. You have to be wary of that. And I mean, I think, I think it's and sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's accidental. Like the fMRI crisis of the last sort of 10 years, where a lot of these brain scanning MRI machines, something like 25% of them had this little glitch that was spitting out false positives. And this was not any scientist committing intentional fraud, but it was them seeing meaning or activity where there was none. And that's how you could get results like interesting activity in the brain of a dead salmon, and it called into question, years of results, and some were fine, but some weren't. And I think there's this danger when you're using fancy machines or fancy words to sort of believe you are touching some kind of inherent truth. And at the same time, it's this interesting spot to be a science journalist, because also science is so under threat, and it is, as a profession, I do completely believe in the work, while also knowing there can be, there's subjectivity, there can be glitches. So it's this interesting time, because I feel both aware of the shortcomings, but double down in defense of the importance. And so it's, it's an interesting time to be doing this work.
Well, and the shortcomings are part of the deal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what that's what science is about.
Yeah, totally.
It's about trying to get past those shortcomings.
Slowly. Yeah.
I was going through the back issues of Radiolab, if you will, as I was getting ready for this conversation, and listening to the episode about growth, and thinking about the amount of time that passed between when that episode was conceived and when it came out into the world. And I guess that's a pretty appropriate metaphor, because, like, you were actually pregnant as that episode was coming together. Is it a typical length of time for to take an episode from idea to air to last so long?
It just depends. Like, the feed is this potpourri of some things that we're scrambling right before, and some that have real time to incubate. And but no, I mean, there are it's this mix of, like, there are episodes out there that someone was maybe working on for over a year, and they're also doing other things, and they're getting other things out the door, and they're waiting to see if someone calls back, or they're waiting to see if something happens with this story they're tracking. But again, so it's this kind of like insane behemoth of moving parts, but sometimes things will absolutely, I think there are some that have taken multiple years for sure. And that doesn't mean that, like, everyone's just sitting around for the year. There's other balls in the air, but that's typical. I think that the average length of time from idea to existence is probably in the, 3 month. And then you have really quick and then really long. But I think average is about 3 months.
So variable gestation.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And so good professional segue here.
Yes.
You have, I believe, 3 youngish kids.
Yes.
Some very young kids.
Baby, so we've got 7 months, 3.5, and 6.
Do you think having these these proto-humans around has influenced how you tell stories, or maybe the other way around?
1,000%. So much. And actually, I think I went into having kids with the worry that it would be creative death. And I think that's a message, especially maybe as a woman, that you get. And I think sometimes there can be a creative pause for sure. But I went into it with such low expectations about what was going to be possible creatively on the other side. And I was kind of bracing myself in this weird way. I had my first kid at 35, and I was like, well, I got to work on a Radiolab, and I started Invisibility, and I finished my book. Before my first was born, and then I was like, and that'll be the end, and I'll hopefully be able to keep a day job, But I think I went into it, that was a message I received a lot, and then I don't know. And then that didn't happen. I think what happened is that, to me, kids, on one hand, they are utterly exhausting. It is so hard. It creates tension with your spouse because you're you're fractured and you're harried. And I don't want to downplay any of that and have a sunny view. But at the same time, they are the best psychedelic drug ever. My brain, the way they see the world, what is interesting to them, what is not interesting to them, what is funny to them. They are actually, I think I had this sense, I'm the youngest in my whole extended family. I didn't really babysit. I didn't have a lot of kid experience until I had my own. And I think I thought they were just like these gentle little things you needed to patronize too. But no, they are wild. They are curious. They are grumpy. They are funny. They actually, I think, have an insanely high standard for a story. Like, it needs to be gripping. They to me as an audience, well, both as just something to watch in the world and think about, like, why are you so fascinated by, the ceiling fan, whatever it is, and then try to, are they thinking about relativity? Do they think they're I don't know, but to try to imagine, and then once they start to get words, to be able to engage with them. And I just felt like it punched a wall in perception, and it gave my brain this influx of, like, both a tilt in perspective, like the world is trippier than I realized, but also like some lightness, like, let's just have fun. I am covered in bruises right now from their elbows. Like, they're bouncing on me off walls. And like, there's just this, I think for me, it really spoke to, for me starting Terrestrials, this kid spinoff was like, I missed nature, and I wanted to think about nature, and I wanted to look to nature for different ways of organizing and flourishing, because this was at the time of COVID and just society feeling really doomed. And it was like, what other models are there to live on this planet? And I want to, like, go to storytellers and scientists who are interesting themselves, but give it to kids and give it in a way that is, like, light and adventuresome. And then I brought in my friend Alan, who's this incredible musician, and we started singing, and suddenly we're singing for science journalism, and like, that was an explosion for me. And it might not be for everyone, but I am learning so much. And then, like, I wrote a children's book, and because I wanted to play with that mind. And it's not just creating kids content. I mean, those are obviously two big changes, but I think when I do sit down to work on more adult things, there's this sense of, like, I want work to feel like sledding. I want to hop on the sled and see where I go, instead of having it feel like drudgery. And I for me, it's created this like openness in my heart for interviewing, for reporting, for investigation, that I think I was, like, really in need of. So for me, it has supercharged my creativity. I don't know. That's what's happened. And it might not last, but right now it's like, it's been really good for it.
It's an interesting paradox. I mean, because at one level, I mean, kids really do suck a lot of energy out of you.
Exactly.
And at the same time, I remember feeling that too. I mean, maybe I still feel, my kids are 16 and 20 now.
Yeah.
But I still relish the times where I can be with them and expose them to something about the world that's cool or interesting or just neat or whatever, and see them experience it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, when you can click on that level where you actually engage them, or they pull you out of your head or teach you a thing, it's, I don't know, it's the best. So that, I don't know, it's like a new hunt for me. Yeah.
Well, and I wish I knew about Trucky Roads before yesterday when I dug a little deeper because I would have a copy in front of me.
Oh, no, it's all good. Yeah.
But what I've been able to see of it, like the visuals plus the text, almost feel like Radiolab or terrestrials in picture book form.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah. Well, the illustrator Hui Skip she's this incredible illustrator in Korea. She just, it's like these explosions of color and that are both kind of have almost like a print making. It's a whiplash. There's like the restraint of kind of carefulness, but then the textures will be, starscapes, and it's very hard to describe, but it's like psychedelic, but like cheerful. I don't know. Watching her bring to life the ideas that I had for this book was like the best process. It was so neat to see.
Maybe like Yellow Submarine without the actual psychedelics.
There you go. Yes, absolutely. That's yeah.
Well, and did it? Do I remember reading? Did it actually emerge from one of your children's love for trucks?
Yeah. So our firstborn and now our second, he loved. I mean, like most. I hate to be gendered about it, but little boys. I mean, he sleeps still often. He sleeps with trucks instead of teddy bears, toy trucks. We'd go out during COVID and we'd just go like truck hunting. I'd put him on the back of my bike and we'd look for construction and just like watch trucks for hours. And he loved trucks. And one day my wife said, and I think she was fishing, but she was like, "Hey, Jude, who's your favorite person in the world?" And he just goes, "Trucky Roads." And we were like, "What? Is that a character? Is that a character from a show? Is that like something from your nursery school? Is that a song?" We looked and looked and looked, and there was no evidence. And he had just invented this person, Trucky Roads, who likes trucks and roads. And I was like, he needs to exist. And I wrote him every year for Christmas. I'll make the kids like a little hand-drawn silly book about an inside joke. And so that year I made Trucky Roads. And it was just this little paper book with my stick figure bad drawings. And then that one like lasted and the kids kept asking for it. And then one day my father-in-law was like, "I think this might be the best thing you've ever written." He's like, "I think," and he was it endured through the coffee stains, and it was a few years. I did not write it to like pitch a children's book, but it endured. And then one day I showed it to my agent along with a bunch of other ideas, and she rejected all the other ones. And she's like, "This one might, let's see." And then they took it. The Simon & Schuster Kids wing took it and found this illustrator, and it was, and it's been out about a year, and we've had some like readings, BYOT, bring your own truck, and kids bring trucks, and one of them we had paint, and kids would like roll the trucks through paint, and like it's just been, the kid readings are so fun, and at the end it has you imagine trucks you could invent, and their ideas are so fun, like they truck with a spatula that slaps your booty, or like all kinds of kid things. What's funny to kids? So yeah.
Well, and the other good thing about the kids' readings is that they're really early in the day.
Early in the day, they're short. It's half an hour. You're done. It's really fun. It's really, really fun.
I wish that this book had existed when my son was little, because when he was, I don't know, less than 3, he had some real speech trouble when he was really young, and now to hear him, you wouldn't think he would ever have speech trouble. But his favorite thing in the world was a milk truck, but he said it as though he were a German person, and so it was the Milchmach.
Oh, that's amazing. The Milchmach. So he could talk about the milk.
Milchmach. Yeah. And actually my mom found him there was a book about a little milk truck. And it was his favorite book for I want to say years. It felt like years. It was probably like 4 months. But,
oh, totally. And this also came out of noticing. I'm trying to woo my kids. I noticed, same with that. Like they just wanted to read the books that were like, here's a digger, here's an excavator, here's a thing. And so this book is that, but like a little bit wacky. And I was like, that's what they're into, categorizing and naming. So let's do it and have fun.
If you don't have it already, Trucks and Diggers 1 to 10.
Oh.
Classic.
Okay, I don't have that one.
It's a board
I have
book.
Goodnight Construction Site. I've got all kinds of road workers, but I don't. Trucks and Diggers 1 to 10.
Truckers, Diggers, yep.
Okay.
I'm sure you can find it on eBay if it's out of print.
Okay. But again, we're sitting here, we just talked about trucks for 10 minutes. Me of 6 years ago, I didn't even notice a truck. And now I'll be driving with friends and I'll be like, Digger! And then I'm like, oh, there are no children in the car. But I get excited. And which is to just say, I don't know. It suddenly I'm it helps you. That's a very specific example, but it helps you notice, it's it points your antenna to different things and helps you to find questions and interest in these places.
Well, right. And so to bring it, I don't know if it's full circle, but it's like a semicircle anyway. I mean, it feels like kids are the ultimate science journalists because they're trying to figure out the way the world works.
And they don't even have the assumptions yet to get in their way. They have this open. I love that. Yes.
And so for a science journalist, having kids as part of your test market or whatever has to be a really gratifying way to go through life.
It is, yeah. And
I put words in your mouth there, but...
No, it is. I love I hadn't thought about that, but they are the original science journalists because they're encountering the world with so many questions. They haven't been told yet. The older they get, the more assumptions they have, and the worse at science journalism they get. But right at the beginning, they are just, they're these blank slates with lots of questions and without assumptions. And I think if there's something to me about wanting to learn from them, to kind of to unlearn and re-inhabit that mind, but also to try to, dazzle them and speak to them in that open place. And that's been... Yeah, that's been a real guiding light in, I would say, the last, sort of 5 years of my creative and professional work. Yeah.
Just wait till they're teens.
Yeah, I know. Then I'll just, I don't know, hide in a blanket and self-medicate and try to get through it. We'll see. Have me back then and we'll see if I'm doing anything.
It's a deal. Lulu Miller, what a great time. And congratulations on Trucky Roads and everything else you do. And let's talk again.
Oh, I would love that. Thanks so much for having me.
That's Lulu Miller. She's the author of Why Fish Don't Exist and Trucky Roads, which is a book for kids, and she's the co-host of Radiolab, produced at WNYC in New York, and just generally well-known and well-respected and really funny science journalist. We were lucky to have her in the studios of North Country Public Radio when she visited the area to speak as part of the St. Lawrence University Writers Series. Ethan Shanty was not speaking as part of that series, but he is in the studio once again with us because he produces this show.
Someday I hope to speak as part of the series, but so far I've not been invited. Mitch, you said at the top that you were not a very studious science student, but I have to imagine that there was probably one science fact that stuck with you since high school or grade school.
The science thing that has stuck with me forever was, I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian Tom Lehrer.
I'm not.
Well, he was a lecturer at MIT, actually, I believe, when my dad was there, and he was there but he wrote a lot of satirical songs, including one that is set to the tune of the Modern Major General, which Gilbert and Sullivan tune. That you look like you are not familiar with at all.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But I bet if you heard it, you would recognize it. Anyway, the entire song is the names of the chemical elements sung one after another to this tune.
Sing it right now.
The beginning goes, there's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and rhenium.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. It's just called the elements.
So that's a science. That's not
really a science fact, but
you can name a lot of the elements, I guess.
I can name a lot. I couldn't tell you their chemical number so that was one of those things that always stuck with me. Tom Lehrer also said, quoting a mythical person in one of his routines, "Life is like a sewer. What you get out of it depends on what you put into it."
That's disgusting. Also was never I took science classes because I had to. And when I got into college, I was definitely prone to falling asleep during the science lectures. The only science fact that I've retained since 7th grade is the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
No, that's useful.
Is it? I don't remember.
Well, if you ever get the mitochondria category on Jeopardy, you are
I'll be able to answer the $100
600
question.
level.
I'm doing pretty good at pop culture Jeopardy for what it's worth.
And see, I haven't even tuned into Pop Culture Jeopardy because I know my pop culture knowledge ended about 1995. Ethan, take us out of it and tell us who puts this show together.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. To find more conversations and support this show, head to ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.
The Van Allen belt. I remember the Van Allen belt.